All right, guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of the CX Chronicles podcast. Super excited to welcome Ryan Stuart, CEO from Kapiche, to the show. Ryan, say hello to the CX Nation, my friend.
Hey, everyone. Great to be here, Adrian. Appreciate the opportunity to chat.
100%. So super excited to dive into Ryan's story today, guys. He's got a really, really cool company that him and his team at Kapiche are building. And he's going to give us the deep dive today. And he's going to give us a good sense for what they're building, what type of space they're trying to really optimize and change. And most importantly, Ryan, you got a bunch of CX and CSers listening to this show. So he's trying to help us think about a whole new, fresh way that we can use our customer feedback, get really excellent understanding what our customers want, what our customers need, and where there's core opportunities for us to build in. So, Ryan, why don't you start off today's episode, my friend? Give the CX Nation a couple-minute story around how you got into this space, man, even before Kapiche. How did you get into this whole land of thinking about customer feedback and thinking about technology? And how did that lead up to you starting the business over at Kapiche?
Yes, sir. Happy to. So my background's originally engineering and computer science, which I think, listening to a few of your previous podcasts seems to be a bit of a theme. And not too long after finishing university, I got relatively lucky in that I got exposed to this field of technology called natural language processing. And at the time, I was working with a small company that was actually commercializing PhD research out of the university that I attended, doing a type of technology that we now call machine learning, specifically unsupervised machine learning. Back then, we didn't have such cool names for such technology. What they were really trying to solve was how could we use a computer to help us understand a large collection of open-ended, unstructured text without having to read it all manually, in a way where we didn't have to tell the computer what we're looking for or train the computer to go and find certain things that we think were important. And it was a really cool piece of technology. It had all these wide range of uses across many different things. And one of those things was CX. Now, unfortunately, the company didn't reach the heights that it wanted to reach. I think part of the reason being that it was a solution to so many different problems. And I ultimately left that company and became a bit of a digital nomad for a while, decided to travel the world for quite an extended period, and was fortunate enough that fortunate enough that my background was engineering, right? So I could work for almost anywhere in the world. So I was doing odds and ends, working for all these different companies while traveling. But I was really, I guess you could say, bitten by the technology, right? I was really taken aback by the problem that they were trying to solve and how prevalent it was. And I've always had this kind of entrepreneurial streak to my being. I think I had my first t-shirt business when I was 15. So there's always been that side of me as well.
Nice.
So married those two things up and thought, perhaps there is a problem to be solved here, because I think the technology that we were working on at the time and the way that it was being positioned as, press a button and get answers to unstructured data looked interesting. The application of it didn't quite reach the heights that we were trying to get it to, but I thought there was something to be done there. So I spent, as part of my digital nomad phase, I spent a bit of time with a friend of mine kind of perusing academic research, because obviously we couldn't reuse the technology from the previous company. We had to come up with our own technology that had a very similar value proposition. So we managed to do that. And that was the kind of romantic period for us, both being technologists. That was the fun. That was the hacking on the code. That was the finding the solution part. And then it became into, all right, well, how are we actually going to commercialize this technology? And I was having conversations with people around go-to-market strategy and around solving these problems. And something that I kept seeing was speaking to, customer experience or customer insights people at relatively large, 500 plus employees, digital B2C companies. And two things that I was hearing at these organizations really struck me. Number one was, this is right around the time, we're talking 5 years ago now. This is right around the time where, sending out surveys was massive. Collecting voice of the customer was massive. Voice of the customer itself had become its own kind of terminology. In fact, you even started to see people with a VOC title at really large organizations.
Yep.
And what I was struck by was, first of all, at least in Australia, which is where we started the company, 50% of the businesses that I spoke to were literally outsourcing their net promoter score. So literally getting market research agencies to do it for them, which market research agencies are great. And they have such fantastic use cases that now allow you to get information that you as an insider in an organization might not be able to get. But I thought, given how key CX metrics were to a business, the fact that they'd be outsourcing the measurement of them and then the synthesis of that data into actionable insights I was surprised by that. But then the second thing that was even more surprising to me was, of the 50% of people that were doing this internally, the overwhelming majority, over 95% of the people that I spoke to in Australia, they were manually processing this data. They were collecting this data via surveys or the support center or whatever those channels were, this customer feedback data. They were manually reading this customer feedback data to try and get insights from it. And those who did have a technical solution in place to try and deal with this problem, they were relying on a solution that had to be pre-trained or constantly tuned to make more accurate, to kind of categorize text into these high-level themes. And the insights they were getting out of it weren't terribly actionable. And again, they found themselves manually reading data when they really wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of why behind customer feedback. And I thought, that is at the time, we're talking like 2018, 2019, approaching 2020, there's no reason why we should live in a world where, arguably, and I'm biased, right? But I'm happy to declare that. But in my opinion, customer feedback data is some of the most valuable data that you can get as an organization. Like
Absolutely.
a business doesn't exist without customers. And to get an insight into that customer's mind through their own words, to really get an understanding for their psyche and how they feel about you or your product or your services, like that's absolute gold. And the fact that all this information is abundant these days, but we're really hamstrung by being able to get value from it due to the ways that we've got to get insights from it. It kind of struck me that that's just insane. And that big companies had people manually combing through thousands of pieces of this data to try and get insights from it was insane. And the fact that you could spin up, a business intelligence solution and quickly graph sales per quarter, or quickly graph net promoter score per quarter, and really democratize structured data across the organization. But when it came to unstructured data, that same agility and that same ability to democratize the access to that data didn't exist. It was just, I just thought it just wasn't right. Like it needed fixing. So that's kind of what led us to start the business.
I love it, man. Number one, you are speaking to a fellow who has spent many a long night going through thousands of pieces of customer feedback and doing manually based tags, manually based bucketing, trying to come up with whatever the different compartments are going to be able to socialize this feedback across a bigger business. And you're spot on, Ryan. That was oftentimes I constantly thought, this is crazy. Now, as I get deeper into the career and deeper into working with bigger companies with more resources, obviously, then you start to become best friends with analysts and people that can help you sort of think about some of the ways you can automate some of this. And that's obviously what I think a lot of folks eventually get to when they're lucky enough to be a part of a company that's big enough to have those resources and to have that additional talent. But it's amazing that you guys immediately saw this opportunity. And as you and I chatted about the last couple of times we've caught up now, I joke, I wish we would have known each other earlier, because a tool like Kapiche could have been so darn helpful to thinking about how you can quickly see some of the word clouding, or see some of the trends, or see some of the themes around where you're getting sentiment focus points that you need to think about, or that you have to manage up to your executive leadership, or that you have to manage down to the rest of the squad, whether it's product or sales or support or whatever part of the business you're really trying to show something on. So I love it. Why don't you jump right into the first CX pillar of team, man? I'd love to hear about the team that you're building at Kapiche. Give us a sense for what types of teams and departments you guys have built, and what types of people you're pulling together to try to figure out this incredible space.
So very early on in founding the company, one of my advisors at the time told me, hey, you have to pick between a product-led culture or a sales-led culture. And I didn't like that binary choice that I was given. I think in hindsight, what that person was trying to say was you have to choose between those two cultures in a go-to-market sense. But I probably interpreted his words a little too literally. And I thought, no, I don't have to choose between a product or a sales culture. We are a customer-first culture. We sell to customer-first organizations. We wholeheartedly believe that listening to customers, understanding customers, not just what they're saying, but how it's impacting your business and how they're behaving with your business or brand, that's the key to having a fantastic business. If you're not solving problems for people, and if you're not providing value to people, you don't have a very strong business. 100%. So we very much wanted a customer first culture. And so we set out to build it. very early on at the stage of, I think it was 5 or 6 people, we hired a customer success person. Not because we didn't have large number of clients, we didn't have large amounts of revenue. We just knew that everything that we did was either going to be customer or team focused. So, high number 6 was customer success. High number 5 was a people and culture person, which traditional startup people look at that and go, that's insanity. But we knew that we had to be attuned to customers' needs. We had to be solving problems for customers, and that we had to be really listening to them and making sure that we were achieving those 2 points. So we wanted to get customer success early. And we also knew that if we had the best possible team who were happy in the role that they were doing, who were highly attuned to the value that they were providing, that we could conquer any problem that ultimately crosses our bows when it comes to building Kapiche and scaling it. So we made that decision to do that early. Interesting, your story about manual coding, because every employee that starts at Kapiche, doesn't matter if they're a receptionist, doesn't matter if they're in the sales team, in the engineering team, doesn't matter what team that they're in, they get given a task in week 1. And that task is they get given 5,000 survey responses from a grocery store.
Nice.
It is open-ended is the first column. And then there's, I think, 9 or 10 other columns with structured data in it, like their gender, their age, how much they spend in the transaction, what was their net promoter score, et cetera, et cetera. And they get told, you need to give a presentation at the end of this week on a Friday, and the entire company of Kapiche will be invited to attend, and not everyone will, but the entire team has been invited. And your role, your kind of imaginary role in this presentation is you are a customer insights analyst for this grocery store. And we want you to help us understand what is the satisfaction and the net promoter score from this data, but also what's driving this score and where should we direct our investment next year in order to maximize C2 scores. And you're free to use any tool that you want to use with 2 caveats. Number 1, you're not allowed to use Kapiche. And number 2, there's no budget. So if you want to pay money for a tool, you've got to pay for it out of your own pocket. And the reason why we do that is what invariably ends up happening is these people start to try and do some form of manual coding, or they will trawl the internet to try and look for a solution to this problem that they can access relatively quickly. And they get a deep ingrained sense of what's the problem that we're solving for our customers. So every person in the business gets that exposure to what's the problem that we're solving for our customers. And in reality, that's just a small part of the problem that we solve, but at least they get exposure to it. And I think that really helps bring everyone that works for Kapiche closer to the customer. And then when you pair that with another core value that we have, it doesn't matter what role you're in at the company. It doesn't matter if you're in engineering, if you're in sales, if you're in marketing, or if you're in customer success. If you see an opportunity to help a customer or to get them unstuck, irrespective of whether it sits inside your roles and responsibilities or not, you're empowered to go ahead and help that customer and do what you can to make their experience better. And we really encourage all of our employees, in fact, it's in our onboarding kit, when faced with a situation, put yourself in the customer's shoes, figuratively speaking, and think to yourself, how would you feel if you're on the other end of what's happening right now? And make any decision that you're going to make from that framing.
I love it, man. I think number 1, I love the idea of talk about, throwing the team right into the deep end in terms of onboarding and just seeing the lay of the land, right? Because you're going to have a bunch of talented people that are going to come to this type of space, and they're not going to know everything about it. There's a ton that all of us have to learn. But I love the fact that number 1, you see how many different options are out there. You get a sense for pricing, you get a sense for commitment, you get a sense for what does it actually take just to start utilizing a potential tool that's going to potentially help with this entire science and this entire space. Then the other piece too, though, is like you're helping them break down how many different ways and cuts and different types of paths there are for thinking about the way that you can not just collect your customer feedback or your employee feedback, but make sense of it. And then I guess here's one last part, and this is just coming selfishly from having spent a lot of time working in a number of different startup and growth focused companies. Man, when you are a part of one of these fast growing companies and you're wearing 10 different hats and you're constantly watching your bandwidth wane almost by the week and by the month because there's extra things coming on your plate, it's really easy for people to think that you can just do one more thing. It's just do this one thing. I know it's not your job, but do it. And that becomes really hard. And it becomes a thing that I know every individual that works at a startup or a growth focused company, they feel that, right? But this is an awesome way to just show people what type of folks they're going to be helping, or what type of folks and users or CX and CSers they're going to be providing another solution and another path for. And then the other thing too, man, and Ryan, you and I talked about this a few times leading up to the show, but like, even for experienced CX and CSers, there's always new emerging pieces of technology, tools, and solutions that do it better than what we've been doing in the past. Last thing is this. My story of joking around about, 5 years ago, even just 5 years ago, even really excellent experienced CX and CS leaders, they needed help. They needed analysts, or they needed other CXMs or customer experience managers, or they needed other customer success operators, whatever you're calling these different roles in your company. They needed other people that could help slice and dice the data, furnish potential insights, show possible directions that you might want to pursue, whether that's leading up to your executive team or socializing back to your customer base. Point is like, any bit of help that we can get this day and age with making that process a bit easier is going to be much, much appreciated. I love it. Ryan, I'd love for you to spend a little bit of time talking about the tools. So as you've built out the team at Kapiche, and as you brought together this band of individuals who are clearly going to become like just experts in the world of creating awesome voice of customer task force and voice of customer reporting groups, what were some of the tools that you and the team had to think about or had to invest in early as you were growing Kapiche to be able to manage this growth, to be able to continue to socialize what you guys were learning with your tool and how you could actually help some of these customers and these ICPs with your Kapiche solution?
Yeah, great question. And as I'm sure you can well understand, this is constantly evolving at a startup.
Absolutely.
It just seems like it's forever a moving target.
It really is.
I like to think about these things kind of in a kind of layered fashion. So let me start at the real bottom layer. We were fortunate enough that the age of the company, we grew up in an era where Slack was just emerging or had just emerged. We've been on Slack for a long time, and we've got that layer of communication there. We're also very fortunate that we emerged around a time where, technologies like segment.com were prevalent and available. So from the very first day of the product existing and being used by customers, we've had events being captured in the product, feeding into Segment and feeding out into a data warehouse. And so we've had that data warehouse in place, and I'm not sure if this is common or not, but we've had this data warehouse in place since day dot. And it's really served us well in terms of being able to collect that data and interrogate that data and understand that data, at least from a quantitative side, around product engagement and product metrics and product usage. So we've built on top of that, and we've laid different BI solutions on top in order to really understand product usage and product engagement. One of our CSMs devised a score called a high value product engagement score. And so what it does is it looks at our end users' usage with the Kapiche product, and it scores it not just on how much time are they spending on the platform, but how many clicks are they making. We tie the scoring to our expected product journey or customer journey inside the product. So when they do certain different actions within the product, they get scored different amounts of points. Okay. And those points get totaled up each week to give a score out of 100 on a per user basis on how highly engaged or how much of these high value product engagement activities are they doing on a weekly basis. So every single user in Kapiche, they are, unbeknownst to them, generating a score of 0 to 100 based on their weekly usage. And CSMs are prioritizing their outreach to accounts or their education activities based on that score. So that's kind of the quantitative side. And then we've got a whole bunch of stuff, we really focus on weekly active users. That's our North Star metric for our product team. So we focus on that a lot. And there's a whole bunch of downstream stuff on top of that. We also have been using Intercom from the very start. So all of our users are very much used to using Intercom to get support, and we try and make sure that there is a response to Intercom within 6 minutes. And that response always comes from a human. Very often in Intercom, we will jump to a Zoom or a Google Hangout to really help that person in, like, literally right there in that moment. Yep. If that's not possible, we've been using Loom a lot to to just record videos and be like, answer their question, this is particularly happens if the person has asked the question and then gone away, or if they need a detailed answer. It's more kind of towards that educational side rather than that support side. The CSM or the CSMs do the support right now. So the CSMs will record a Loom video, literally talking to the person, being like, hey, here's how you do ABC, or here's the answer to your question, and send that back to them in the intercom chat so they can actually see the Loom video. And I can't count the number of times that our customers have specifically called that out to us and said, because, we deal mostly with, mid-market companies, sometimes enterprise and Australia companies, and they're just not used to that level of service.
Yeah, right.
They're not used to seeing a CSM on a Loom video being like, hey, sorry that you're having this problem. Here's how to fix it. Let me demonstrate it with my machine so you know exactly how to do it and get you unstuck.
Absolutely. Yep.
So then on the qualitative side, given we're in the world of helping people understand qualitative data, we try to set our bar pretty high for making sure that we have good practices when it comes to our own qualitative stuff. And this is probably the area that's evolved the most over time. And it's interesting because we ourselves, we're too small to use our own product. And I wish that we were bigger to use our own product because it would solve a lot of problems for us. And I think a problem that a lot of businesses have, certainly the problem that we had, is there's all these channels where there's qualitative feedback coming in. Yep. There is the obvious ones, right? So at any point in Kapiche, you can click a button and leave product feedback. We also, one of the metrics that the product team really looks at a lot is what we call product market fit. So it's a survey originally devised by the folks over at Superhuman that asked people how disappointed would they be if they could never use Kapiche. If Kapiche was suddenly yanked away from them, they could no longer use it. So we use survey software to manage that. In our case, we use a piece of survey software I think is called refiner.io. And we use it because it's in product. So it's kind of, we don't break people out of their flows. We can get that in product feedback. Anytime anyone leaves a survey response for us, two things happen. Number one, that response gets automatically posted into Slack, into a customer feedback channel, so everyone in the company can see the feedback that's being left. Whether it's someone saying, hey, please, could you improve the product this way? They've just clicked the button and made a suggestion, or whether they've answered a product market fit survey, or if they've answered one of the surveys we have along the customer journey. So we'll ask people after onboarding, how easy was it, a customer effort score survey, how easy was it to understand and use Kapiche, and that automatically gets posted to customer feedback. We're then also collecting all that feedback into a central, what we call the product control room, which is really just an Airtable that we've set up to kind of triage and rank that customer feedback. And awesome. We're ranking that feedback based on a couple of key metrics. Some important ones are, how often have we seen this? How much pain is it causing the customer? How much effort is it for us to do something about this in a kind of engineering and product sense? And, one that might be slightly controversial for CX people, but I think is important. What's the expected commercial return by us doing something about this? And so we'll rank all of our feedback by that. And so surveys is easy. The harder bit is collecting anecdotal evidence or conversations that customer experience or customer success people, or even salespeople in a kind of pre-sales context, are having with prospects. So we provide ways for all of our internal people to log feedback as well. And that feedback goes through a very similar system. And then we will literally tie pieces of feedback that we've received to epics, which are a type of ticket that the product team is planning to work on. So a product team might decide, hey, we've seen enough feedback now to know that there's a particular issue or there's an opportunity here to solve a pain for a customer. We understand how much engineering effort it's going to take. We've had a guess and kind of tried to model out what we expect the commercial return to be. And so all of our decisions on what we build and how we prioritize it are based on all that qualitative feedback data that we get. And then the harder bit is marrying what we're seeing on the qualitative side to what we're seeing on the quantitative side. Yep. And the reason why I say I wish we had Kapiche is, one of the things that we're really trying to help with is all of that data across all the different platforms, whether it's support, whether it's surveys, whether it's socials, whether it's, notes in the CRM, putting it all in one central place with the quantitative data to be able to do that prioritization, that understanding, that insights finding. That's what we help companies do. And it just sucks that we're not big enough to use our own product to share.
No, look, I think so. Number one, awesome explanation of just, you made an incredibly complex, difficult just such an uphill battle sound relatively easy when you kind of lay it out this way. But there's a few points I want to immediately kind of go back to. I absolutely love the fact that you've highlighted this idea of product feedback and product usability and interface usability and expectations being completely married to your CX and your CS efforts. Because if they aren't, especially when you're building a SaaS solution or a product-based feature that is going to literally be the thing that either keeps people coming back and keeps them not only adopting, but utilizing it on a daily basis. When you think about a company like Facebook and Google, what's the average daily number of hits that their average consumers are using? It's a disgusting number. Frankly, the entire world is addicted to some of these solutions, right? But their adoption, their utilization, their retention, and then their stickiness or their amplification of stickiness is what made these absolute globe-changing companies, right, a thing. So I love that you call that out. The second piece that I want to dive into, Ryan, is this idea that you're talking about of just how critical it is to have a quantitative and a qualitative view. And I know that you and I were chatting about this the other day, man, but like, it's amazing how many wildly successful companies don't necessarily have this bit figured out yet. Maybe they've figured out how to crack a specific industry or disrupt a specific space, or maybe they figured out how to go trip a couple 800-pound gorillas up, right? And that's awesome. But then when you get into the weeds in terms of the way that they're thinking about leveraging the data sets that they've been able to build, it's extremely common to not have a super clean, clear, seamless bridge built, if you will, between the way that they're leveraging and acting upon their quantitative and their qualitative. Now, don't get me wrong. I know it's because this stuff is extremely hard and you need really smart people spending a ton of time. And frankly, it takes different phases. You're right about the layered approach. There's different phases of growth. There's different phases of evolution. I'd add one additional layer into this, Ryan, which is sometimes another really complex layer is executive appetite too, right? Because depending on what type of business or what type of industry you're in, if there's no executive appetite for this stuff, guess what? It's going to be hard. It's going to be really, really hard to marry those different features and those different focus areas. And then lastly, I think it's one other piece. Talking about just how this feedback can be gold, or it could be fuel for innovation and optimization. This is where so many growth focused companies, so many startups specifically, because they have different silos and they have different leaders with different experience sets and different focus points, probably with different incentive plans, right? Kind of competing. It also makes it really difficult to think about how you're going to build this almost like this data map or this data view in a way that gets everybody on the boat rowing the boat in the same direction. And that is a totally separate challenge, which every business and every customer focused business leader inside of a business has to show up every single solitary work every day to work, trying to hit on that drum and to pound on that drum and to make sure that people are really kind of rowing the boat in the same direction. So incredible ideas there. I really, really like those.
There's before we kick on, sorry, you've made me think of two things. So I think the way that I've seen most successful in terms of selling up to executives on why this qualitative stuff matters is to not necessarily talk to them about why qualitative is important, but talk to them about the circumstances upon which you're going to need or will find that qualitative data to be valuable if you're an organization that hasn't prioritized it until now. And I think the anecdote that is going to resonate with the most people is I can't count how many people I've spoken to that are either in a BI team or responsible for putting together some sort of report around some key metrics to an executive. And an executive will turn around, something's happened to this metric. It's gone either up or down in an unexpected way. And the executive will go, why did that happen? And then all of a sudden, there is this mad scramble where people are going, why did that happen? How do we figure out why that happened? Is there other data we can look at to figure out why that happened? Qualitative will answer that question for you. And if you've got the systems in place so you're at least capturing the data and you've got it available to you, worst case scenario, you're going to be able to repeat our onboarding tasks and spend a week manually reading it to try and get some answers. Best case scenario, you've got some sort of automated system in place to get those answers for you relatively quickly. And then the second point I wanted to mention that kind of occurred to me when we're talking about the Kapiche product team. The Kapiche product team has a lot of places it can go to get insight. But in my opinion, and I'm fairly certain in the product team's opinion as well, the most valuable place they can go to get insight from is the customer success team. Yeah. And the reason why is And I don't know how long we're going to be able to do this for or how far it will scale, but we've actually made a decision to have the customer success team involved in the sales cycle. So in our sales cycle, we'll generally get some data from a prospect, put it into the platform, and then demonstrate it back to them. We'll ask them for a set of criteria on, what are some business challenges you're trying to solve right now? Let us demonstrate the platform getting you the insight to solve those problems, and then we'll turn it over to you for access. The customer success team actually coordinates that interaction. So the customer success team gets visibility pre-sales, and then of course the customer success team gets all this visibility post-sales. So the customer success team is the most important source of data for the product team, of qualitative data for the product team.
I love that you're calling that out. I think take it one step further. So many growth companies, especially if they don't have lines in the sand or they don't have lines on the pitch clearly defined, and you don't necessarily know when you're going from defense to kick the ball up to midfield to give it to offense to score the goal. This is another huge reason why having your CS involved is going to be helpful, because every company, typically where you do start to get those answers and you catch some of those buzzwords, or you catch some of those trends, or you catch some of those themes about our friends in marketing and our friends in sales, pre-conversion, right? Pre-sale. CS typically has an abundance of information around what customers loved about that process, what they didn't like about that process, what expectations were never even mentioned, what expectations were set super, super clear from the get-go. And you're spot on, Ryan. Like, having those voices and those eyes and those ears and those brains from our CS and our CX folks in those conversations early, it makes a massive difference. No doubt about it. Ryan, I'd love for you to spend a little bit of time talking about process. So as you've built the team, and as you guys have brought on more and more customers at Kapiche, what have you guys had to do to manage the way that you optimize process, or the way that you think about capturing knowledge, or the way that you actually, because now you guys have all of these different smart people building the Kapiche team. How have you had to think about building playbooks? I'd love for you to spend a couple minutes talking about some of those ideas.
Yeah, it's been the way that I categorize it is through the school of hard knocks.
I like it. Hey, that's the way to do it, my friend.
It started out with no process at all, because everyone's just too busy trying to figure out how to get off the ground and survive. And then in my experience, at least at Kapiche, you only realize that what you've got isn't working when it's too late and things start breaking, and you're like, oh no, things are breaking. Everything's on fire. We're going to have to try and do something about this. So we're big users of an internal wiki. We started out with Confluence. We ended up migrating to Notion. Everything that the company does is on Notion now, including all CS and sales and all types of different playbooks. We have started to try and utilize the CRM much more. So beforehand, we were using Airtable a lot to capture customer information. And more recently, once we've had some new team members join, thankfully for us, they've been proactive about this process. And they're like, hey, we can't have all these different systems that we have to go to in order to try and capture where this data exists. So we need it all to come back into the CRM. So, and to my surprise, the CS team has led that project. And we're lucky in that, we have customer success managers. We also have technical account managers, and our best technical account managers are obviously users of our product, and the real power users of our product are customer insights people. So we tend to hire people that come from that analyst background, and it just so happens that those people are quite good at business intelligence solutions as well, and setting up these systems. So they've taken control of setting up the CRM to make sure all the right customer data is in the right spot. So if there's ever a question about how a customer's going, you can go to the CRM, and the CRM will even link you off to a dashboard that shows you product engagement from that particular customer. So that's all in one place. All of the playbooks are all maintained and curated in Notion. We do not right now have a regular cadence of let's go back and review these playbooks. We probably should have that process in place, but we don't have it right now. And then all of our kind of day-to-day interactions on a customer basis are in a project management tool. We ourselves use a tool called ClickUp. And we've used it because we just found it's so malleable. It doesn't seem to be opinionated in how you should do things. It's much more on a kind of Airtable side of you can kind of mold it to do the way that you want. So for example, when a customer enters an onboarding phase, we'll automatically spin up a board that has and spin up the tasks that needs to be done for onboarding, and they'll be put into a Kanban board so that CSMs can drag those tasks across.
That's awesome. That's huge. Ryan, one quick point that you called out, is just, well, two things. Number one, all awesome stuff, but I think the part about control and monitoring. So for our listeners, man, building the playbooks, capturing the content, socializing the content, onboarding the content, and then training the content. That's one part. But Ryan just called out what I think many of us customer focused business leaders can struggle with at times, because we've got so much damn stuff on our plate, which is the idea of controlling and monitoring some of that playbook or that SOP or that confluence information. Because the reality is, we do, as CX and CSers, we hold so many answers to marketing, to sales, to product, to analytics, to finance. Frankly, we know a ton about some of the things that our customers are dealing with their payments, or with their payment preferences, or their payment suggestions. And the reality is, every business is going to have a different appetite, and every business is going to have different bandwidth. But I think it's super important that you called out thinking about what you can do today is going to be key, whether it's once a month, once a quarter, even if all you can do is once a year. Going back and looking at this information, looking at this content, looking at the knowledge base and the confluence, and really making sure that you're updating it, making sure that it's up to life, thinking about it as a living, breathing document. That's going to be huge. The last idea is this, though. For companies that are doing it extremely well, when you're taking, number one, if you're too busy, immediately start thinking about which A players you can delegate these tasks to. Because frankly, in my experiences, Ryan, most of the people, that the guys and the gals that know this stuff better than anybody in the world, they're typically frontline A players who are kicking butt every single day with your customers. They know the ins, they know the outs, they know the loves, they know the hates, they know everything about the business. And they typically already know your top 5 things that if you just did it tomorrow, you'd probably be a better, more profitable, much higher retained type of company with your customer portfolio. But taking a starting point on that is huge. So that's the first thing. Second thing too, I love the idea that you're sharing with us about not only just the tools part that we're talking about, but you're spot on, man, where the idea of like context switching. This is coming up a lot too, by the way. Many of our episodes recently, we have more and more incredible customer focused business leaders talking about mitigating your context switching. One of the easiest ways that you can make your CX or your CS team bigger, faster, stronger, higher ROI with less heads, all that fun stuff. Mitigate your toolkit, man, right? Talk about what are the couple tools that your agents can master. Mitigate context switching. Don't have 27 tabs open if you can get away with that. I know it doesn't always work that way, and every company's got to build towards that place. But Ryan, spot on, man. The faster that you can mitigate that context switching and provide a few solutions that your agents can master, the faster you're going to get running, and the faster you're going to be cooking with gas. So I love it. Ryan, I'd love to dive into the fourth CX pillar of feedback. So we've already hit on a bunch of this, but different question for you, man, because you guys are like your feedback experts and specialists. I'd love to hear you talk for a couple of minutes about just some of the ways, not only the ways that the Kapiche team is leveraging feedback, but just some of the cool things that you guys have seen your customers doing to take some of the feedback, take some of the sentiment analysis, take some of the wordsmith and the word clouding. What are some of the coolest things that you've seen some of these customers do that has really changed the game, or really, really kind of put them in a completely different position for using that customer feedback as fuel for innovation?
Yeah. So I think, really broadly speaking, at an industry level, the thing that I've seen emerge, particularly in digital B2C businesses in the last 5 to 10 years, is organizations, and I'm talking bigger organizations now, they have come to understand that, you know what, the support person, the person in store, the person that touched the customer, they are not the ones that are responsible for customer experience. Sure, they play an important role in the customer experience, but 9 out of 10 times, the poor agent in the support center is simply triaging some really poor customer journey that a customer's been exposed to. And it wasn't them that exposed the journey, it's the business that exposed the journey.
Spot on.
For the business to fix that problem, they need visibility that it's causing friction, that it is causing people to leave the product, that there is some sort of suboptimal situation that needs to be fixed and needs to be improved that will lead to better commercial outcomes. And some of the better customer-centric organizations started to realize this and started to pair customer insights teams with customer experience teams, so that these insights were going up to leadership or going out to other business units, so they got visibility of that. So I think that's the first important change. The next is, we live in such a digital world these days. Zendesk didn't exist, 10 or so years ago, right?
Yeah,
Like
right.
the idea that the support center was digitized is a relatively new concept. I know things move quickly in the digital world, but if we just take some perspective, it's a relatively new concept. These survey providers only spun up in the last 15, 20 years. So yes, there is the ability to collect data from customers in a kind of deliberate way through surveying, but I don't think customers love getting surveys. There's a time and a place for it. And I'm not saying you shouldn't survey. You absolutely should be. It should be a core part of your strategy. But there is definitely such a thing as survey fatigue.
Absolutely.
The good news is that because things are so digital now, there's all these other different sources of customer feedback data that are available to you that probably weren't available to you 10 years ago. So you can start looking at customer support data to try and understand what's driving support volumes, what are the type of conversations. Going back to a guest you had a few episodes ago, you can look at the messaging data to see, hey, what's the type of messages that's been happening? Why are people contacting us? What do the resolutions look like? What does a top agent performer look like versus a poor agent performer? And how can we help the people that are lower on the performance scale get to the top end of the performance scale?
Yep.
There's all this social media data out there where people are having conversations about you and you don't even realize it. There's so many different sources of feedback data available to you now. I think the real key to winning in this space is understanding that they exist and putting a strategy in place to utilize them so that you've got top-notch intelligence for the business that doesn't rely on you having to say to the customer, hey, what do you think about us every 2 seconds? So in that realm, one of the most innovative things that I've seen is actually at a university. They have their own app, and inside that app, they have a function like a Facebook Messenger inside the app.
Okay.
Where students can talk to staff from the university. And they know universities, I think pretty much this is a trend across the board, there is a double-digit percentage drop-off usually from a student enrolling in a class to a student actually showing up to the first day of class.
Right.
And it's high, like it's up near, from what I've seen, it can be up near 50% drop-off.
Wow.
And this drop-off is worth lots of money to these organizations. If they can prevent this drop-off and they get more students attending classes, they have a much better commercial outcome. So this particular university has analyzed the conversations that are happening between staff and students and segmenting people that show up to the first day of class. What do those conversations look like? Versus people that don't show up to the first day of class. What do those conversations look like? And how can we take learnings from the people that do show up to the first day of class to help the other group of people that don't show up to the first day of class attend, get them to that first day of class? And, the insights are almost always around how we can provide better support, particularly to students that are either disadvantaged or running into unexpected hurdles when it even comes to showing up to the first day of class. Perhaps they have gaps in knowledge of how to interact with the university. And all of this stuff is surfaced through the feedback from just them looking at the conversations that staff are having with students. They get all this insight to help people come to that first day of class. That's more of the innovative stuff.
I love it, man. What you immediately made me think about was, look, I told you, Ryan, too, the other day, we recently had Fred Reichel on our show, who's the creator of the NPS. And I get it. I know many of our listeners are thinking, well, we take NPS, so we're doing a good job with getting our feedback. And what you just made me think about with your university example, leading world-class CX and CS strategies right now are literally grabbing feedback across the entire journey. You're getting your marketing and your awareness feedback here. You're getting your sales or your pre-conversion feedback here. You're getting your onboarding feedback for the first couple of days, the first 7 days where you're expected to use this product, use this feature, either get something from it or not get something from it. Then you get into account management and customer portfolio management where you're thinking about retention and upselling. Point is like, you can get really deep and really wide in this space, depending on what your business and what your willies and your wares are that you're selling. And you can just start in these simple facets, right? You don't have to have all of this stuff figured out on day one. Taking the time to create a handful of different surveys across the journey map, number one.
Yep.
Number two, I love the idea that you're talking about, what you immediately made me think about with the students that do show up and then the students that don't show up. You got me thinking about, like, make sure that somebody in the company is listening to your existing customer feedback, And please, I hope somebody's taking the time to think about the people that have already left you, the people that have already churned, the people that have already moved on to your competitors, or they've completely left the space altogether. Understand why. Understand what forced them to leave. What were the consternation points that got to the point where they wanted to cancel? They wanted to delay using the service or the product. Because understanding those two different worlds, man, it gives you so much valuable insights into where to prioritize your OKRs, where to invest in your product, where to invest in your team, how to think about spending your resources, right? This is huge. So absolutely love it.
I got two other things I want to add here. One kind of is very useful for, anyone that's going to spin up surveys across the customer journey, and one that hopefully is useful for other B2B businesses like us. So 100% agree. Spinning up surveys is easy. You should be measuring the customer journey. I would encourage everyone to use this rule of thumb when it comes to spinning up a survey and designing that survey. When the results from this survey come back, or this data from the survey comes back, what is it going to enable you to do at the business?
Yep.
And if that answer to that question isn't clear, then you are probably contributing to the survey fatigue that customers
100%.
Don't just collect numbers for the sake of collecting them. Have them aligned to some sort of strategy, have them aligned to some sort of action plan, have them aligned to some sort of insights or analysis or analytics strategy so that you can actually get the insights from it and then do something with that data.
Big time.
The second thing that I wanted to point out, and something that I probably should have mentioned in the team section, and I hope this is useful for other B2B businesses. The little hack that we've found to try, and particularly at the early stage, to try and really break down silos and where it's advantageous to blur the lines in the sand. And, the important context here is, someone said to me a while ago, and I found it to be so true, there's no such thing as the optimal organizational org chart. There's no such thing as the perfect organizational org chart. Like, there's different org charts, and different organizational designs are going to work for different businesses.
Yep.
What we've done is, yes, we have a sales team. Yes, we have a customer success team. Yes, we have a marketing team. But we have what are called cross-functional go-to-market pods, where the CSMs, the TAMs, the salespeople all sit on a day-to-day team together. They have stand-ups every week together. And so there's one team, cross-functional team, that works together, and they will serve a particular market. And that pod has performance incentives that go across sales and customer success that the entire pod's responsible for achieving. And so it really breaks down the silos of customer success talking to sales and, pre and post journey, to make sure that a customer, it helps the customer journey as well. There's not this jarring, like, you're getting thrown over the fence to customer success now, you're getting thrown over the fence to this team now. You get, from the moment that you engage with us to the moment that you, hopefully this never happens, leave being a Kapiche customer, you get handled and you deal with one team that is a cross-functional team that goes across sales and customer success.
Yep. I love it. The first part, Ryan, it makes me think at CXC with our clients, we call it the so what moments, meaning, what is the point of collecting the stuff, soliciting the stuff, poking people, spending their valuable time, if you're not going to do anything with it? And then most importantly, once you start getting good at collecting the stuff, so what? You need to have a plan of action for how you're going to follow up, how you're going to improve from the feedback, and what you're going to do to invest in the things that your customers or your employees are telling you to get better with. So what? That's the first part. The second part too is just love the pod-based idea. And this is why, at CXC, we are constantly reminding people CX and CS is a team sport. It is not up to the CX and the CSers in the business. It involves every single member of your team. It involves every single member of the business. And if some of these different roles and these different departments and these different folks in your company don't have a really clear understanding for how they impact the customer experience, you should probably have a conversation about why you have those roles and why you have those teams, because if they can't answer that, you're already a little bit behind. So I absolutely love some of the things you're calling out. Before we wrap up the show, my friend, this has been a pleasure, and so many interesting insights, so many awesome stories, and love the things that you and the team are working on at Kapiche, Ryan. But before we wrap up, where can people find out more about you, my friend, and where can people find out more about Kapiche?
Yeah, so for me, I think the easiest place is probably LinkedIn, or, I'm not a very active Twitter user, so probably don't bother. Don't waste your time on my Twitter. LinkedIn's probably your best shot. And with Kapiche, Kapiche.com, Kapiche with a K.
I love it. Ryan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining the CX Chronicles podcast. And I'm going to look forward to keeping our conversation moving into the forward, my friend.
Appreciate it, sir. Thanks for having me.